Globally and in India, there's a lot of talk happening about the environment.
Yet, some aspects which are crucial to this conversation currently seem missing, like caste,
Class,
language,
gender,
Adivasis,
the youth.
and questions of environmental justice.
Not only are these themes missing, those who can represent these issues in possibly the most apt way are missing too.
And it's not because they don't have anything to say, it's because a lot of us are not listening.
So, in an attempt to alter this, we present to you Blind Spots.
It will bring on this platform women and a few men from Dalit, OBC, Adivasi communities and countries of Global South.
I'm Arpitha Kodiveri, a postdoctoral researcher at NYU Law.
And I'm Vaishnavi Rathore, environment lead at the Bastion. And this is Blind Spots.
This episode of Blind Spots, we talk about environmental crimes. Like, who does the state actually see as environmental criminals? How do corporates and individuals fit into this? And how can accountability be maintained? Given that these are some of the tough questions we have in mind, we have an amazing set of panelists to discuss it with. We begin with a seemingly simple question. How effective is criminal law in holding corporates accountable in the context of the environment?
If you look at criminal law generally, and I'm sure there are a lot of specifically criminal justice experts who will show that a lot of individual crimes that are committed by small offenders, street offenders, are taken much more seriously by law enforcement than crimes that are committed by corporations. Corporations are given a wide variety of options in terms of regulation. You can go via administrative sanctions, you can go via civil liability, civil fines, especially under pollution laws in India, there can be both civil and criminal liability imposed. So we do see a lot of criminal law specifically enacted in statute for environmental questions, but the choice to prosecute criminally always depends on the state. And a large part of the discussion in the subfield of green criminology, which is the study of environmental crime from a criminological perspective, is that there is a nexus between the state and the capital owning class that allows corporations specifically to be less liable for environmental crimes than individual offenders.
Similar to Mrinalini's argument of how law is designed to protect company interests, it comes down to heavily impact individuals. Nikita makes a similar observation in her work with communities in Madhya Pradesh. Criminal law tends to perpetuate existing biases on the basis of caste.
A lot of these communities, particularly post-independence after 1952, after the Criminal Tribes Act being repealed, have been treated as habitual offenders, which is just this really vague category that there exists no definition for in law. Which means that it's an absolutely discretionary category and one that is left to the discretion of the police. So we see that, these are communities that are routinely subjected to surveillance. There are registers that are maintained in police stations of these so-called habitual offenders. Then, of course, people are routinely subjected to surveillance, so much so that, there are communities in Madhya Pradesh who are too scared to leave their village because they know that they go to the market area, they will be arrested by the police. So there are several communities like that, whether they're Pardhis, Kanjars. You see that, the entire system has been designed to really perpetuate this narrative of criminality and to constantly treat them through the lens of being criminal.
To change things around environmental crimes, both Mrinalini and Nikita believe that we need better systems for accountability. For Mrinalini, India adopting an ecocide law could change things dramatically, but this requires some careful consideration.
When we think of ecocide as it's currently proposed under the ICC framework, if it ever were to get accepted, it does not recognize a corporate responsibility. It recognizes only individual responsibility. So individuals can be held guilty. Now, that is very difficult to do in cases of ecocide at the domestic level because the entities who can be usually held responsible for environmental crime of this magnitude, where it's considered a wanton act committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and widespread damage to the environment. It's not one person doing it. You either have a state machinery or large corporations, multinational corporations. So in terms of India deciding to regulate ecocide, they would have to have a very clear understanding of who it is that we are criminalizing, whether it is corporate responsibility, whether within corporations do we hold directors liable, whether we hold officers liable, whether we hold only the actual individual liable, and to what extent vicarious liability would be put in place. So if I, as an employee, commit a crime that only benefits me and doesn't benefit my company at all, my company cannot be held liable. But if I commit a crime in order to help my company benefit, and if I'm doing it within the scope of my employment, then my company can also be held liable vicariously. So these are the rules that we really need to clarify procedurally, rather than the content of what the crime of ecocide could be. Because I think we do have significant clarity on what is considered environmental destruction.
But Nikita, check and balance and reforms could be a real game changer.
Something that we've also been trying to do is to really build in these systems of checks and balances, right? To be able to practice accountability when there are these cases of abuse of powers, when there are instances of violence against people from the community by the police. And I keep saying the police because that is like the maximum and the most routine kind of interaction with the criminal justice system that anybody who interacts with the system that they have, right? Because like they are in so many ways the gatekeepers to the system. So to be able to create these checks and balances, which is something that does not exist right now. So for instance, to talk about building accountability, in 2017, a Pardhi woman in Bhopal died by suicide as a result of police harassment. And of course, that the police department refused to conduct any kind of departmental inquiry against their officers. So, ultimately, like members of the community had to approach the court, and, the court ordered a CBI investigation into the case, and ultimately an FIR was registered, and now the police personnel are being prosecuted, right? So what this meant is that for people living in that particular basti from the Pardhi community where this woman died as a result of police harassment, in those cases, like the police surveillance or the police route, like randomly showing up and picking up people, like that is something that reduced significantly, right? Because now for that particular police station, there was this precedent. There are several other cases where we want to be able to push back, whether it's through the courts, whether it's through, human rights commissions, and not just push back in individual cases, but also be able to, utilizing our research work, really draw attention to how some of these laws in their essence, in their ethos, are used to criminalize the lives and livelihoods of many communities, right?
For both Nikita and Mrinalini, holding corporations accountable, or just the idea of accountability in and of itself, is harder to achieve and easier to think about as a legal concept. Clearly, as Nikita lays down, the challenges that come along the way are a set of presumptions that one attaches both to communities and a certain kind of crime.
One of the narratives that is constantly something that we have to struggle with is to say that these are communities that are predominantly like professionally criminals, professionally committing crimes, are the ones that might have been arrested or been falsely implicated. Those are aberrations, and those are aberrations in the sense of like maybe there are one or two police officers who have abused their powers. But for us, the question is to be able to actually pick up and to really puncture holes into this narrative of exceptionalism, to say, well, it's not a case of individuals being falsely implicated or individual police officers, abusing their powers. That is the nature of the beast. That is the way that the system functions, and this is the way that everyday policing is operating, right? This sort of presumption of guilt is happening day in and day out, and you see that people are being subjected to over arrest, and these are all people who are from these communities.
From Mrinalini, the adoption of an ecocide law comes along with a whole other set of challenges.
The thing with an ecocide law is that it is the destruction of the environment, and it is a very broad crime. And to be able to create very specific provisions under which liability can be imposed is a massive challenge. And to do that, we need to have an existing liability regime that we can rely on for working, which it doesn't right now. We still don't know how it is that we're treating corporate criminals. And the question arises then within India whether we are willing as a public to look at corporations as criminals. Like a very simple example was the Volkswagen scandal. The Volkswagen scandal was a very textbook case of how corporate ethos and corporate behavior led to the commission of an illegal activity. We still don't see people treating Volkswagen as a criminal corporation, right? Because the products, the company are seen as being very distant from the actual criminal liability. But that same luxury is never afforded to human criminals. If you lose your reputation as a criminal once, it's very difficult then to rehabilitate yourself. Till we are not willing to have that discussion that whether we are willing to criminalize and punish corporations for criminal activity, for disregarding human life at the cost of profit, I don't think we can succeed in creating an effective ecocide law.